biologics came to some of these recoveries.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to.
All right, we're here today with Dr. Paul Thigpen, and we have a really great topic to discuss today: extraterrestrials in the Catholic Church. One of his many books, because I've found out there's 60. He's written 60 books. That's quite a number, Paul. So we're going to get into this discussion. And before we start, of course, like and subscribe, follow us. Paul, how you doing?
Doing great here. Jonathan, thanks for the invitation.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for joining me. I'm very happy to have you here. As we were talking a little bit off screen, I got your book. I stumbled onto it, I don't know, maybe a few months ago. I didn't read it right away, but it was like, oh, I've always been into the UFO stuff, and I just really wanted to see what your book had to say, and it was very different for me, which I was really glad to read the historical aspect of this book. Very deep. By the way, are you working on any new books right now?
Not yet. I've got a couple of ideas, but I'm actually working on a podcast commentary series on St. Augustine's Confessions. It'll be a 20-episode series with 10 books, and I'm having so much fun. St. Augustine, I encountered him in grad school before I became Catholic, and he really helped me come to the Catholic Church. So I'm just enjoying the time with him. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, that's one of my favorites. I made a goal to myself to read that once a year. I haven't fallen into that every time, but
you should have written the commentary, maybe.
Yeah. I can't wait. Let me know, please. Keep me posted when that gets up.
All right, it'll start in January.
Okay, great. All right. That's beautiful. So I just want to ask you, first off, what really got you into writing this particular book? How long did it take you? What made you want to write it?
Well, I've had a lifelong interest back in the 60s when you had the Air Force doing Project Blue Book, which was kind of their project looking into this, although it was 50s, had begun saying there are things out there we're seeing. And so that's always been an interest of mine. And I was an atheist from the age of 12 to 18. After I became a Christian at 18, it was one of the things that I thought, wow, I'd really like to see how that fits in with Christian faith. And then had it on the back shelf. I was writing all those other books, and this never seemed to be as pressing a topic as the others. Yeah. And then a few years ago, especially once I became Catholic, I thought, now I really want to write this book about Christian faith, specifically Catholic, because of the history, because of the documentation within the Catholic Church of theologians and writers and popes and saints and all kinds of folks about what they thought. Excuse me. So a couple of years, well, by now it was 2019, so that's almost 5 years ago. There was a a piece in the New York Times written by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, and which they basically were reporting that despite its denials, the federal government turned out for the whistleblowers, and it's been verified many times over, that they had a program going to study what they now call UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, or anomalous phenomena. They keep changing it for years and years, despite their denial that they were even interested in such things. And I remember thinking when I saw that, and it even mentioned one person claiming, who was giving a report to Congress in a closed session, that there were programs for studying crash retrievals. So UFOs that had crashed from which they retrieved things. I thought, oh my goodness, if this is true, excuse me, eventually it's probably going to be made public. There'll be disclosure. What are Catholics and other Christians to think of this? Is there, if this turned out to be something true, is the Catholic faith deep enough and rich enough and nuanced enough to accommodate such a thing, the way it accommodated the so-called Copernican revolution, when we discovered that Earth was not the center of the universe? And my suspicion was, the Catholic faith that I've discovered in my late adulthood. Certainly could, but let's see. So that prompted me to get working on it, and excuse me, I worked on it for 2 years. The biggest research part was the history, as you mentioned. My field is not just theology, but historical theology.
Yeah.
So what that branch means is that you, anytime, excuse me, want to talk about a theological issue, you don't start with what people are saying, your contemporaries are saying. You go back as far as you can in the historical conversation, and look at what's already been said, and then that leads you into where we are now. It helps you to understand lots of things. That's so important, especially in the Catholic tradition, because of the word tradition. It is so. Tradition means that which is handed on from those before, and it's essential to our self-understanding of what truth is and what God has done. So that's why a good portion of the book was that I went all the way back first to the Church Fathers, and then realized I had to look a little bit at the pagan Greek and Roman philosophers, because the Church Fathers were, in certain ways, they read them widely, and were in certain ways kind of responding to some of those things that they had said. So, excuse me, that took a long time.
Mhm.
That's why there are more than 550 footnotes in this book. And so I allow that. The way I like to talk about it is that, imagine you're coming to a party late and people are standing around in conversational groups, and you walk up to one with your glass of Coke or wine or whatever, and they're talking, and they've been talking for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then you hear something and you jump in and make a point. And they all kind of look at you and say, yeah, that's what he just said. And then you try to make another point. So, well, yeah, we already talked about that. It's the same way with
Mhm.
theological conversation. You really need to know where the conversation has come from, where it's led, and gives you. So, for instance, even in scriptural interpretation, sometimes there are passages we look at them and we think, well, obviously this is the meaning. But then you go back and you start looking at what the Church Fathers said about that passage, what St. Thomas Aquinas said, Bernard, others, and you realize, wow, that's not how they read it at all. This, at the very least, that's another valid interpretation. I don't have it all down, So those kinds of things, excuse me, took the majority of the time to do. That's the first section of the book, which is more than half. The second section then is where I actually do the theological analysis. I say, all right, given all this, let's talk about several issues. The first one being, is this contrary? Would the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence be contrary to the Catholic faith, and has the Church ever even pronounced on it? And then after that, having the answer that I, am convinced is true is, no, it's not contrary to the Catholic faith. And I went through, deep analysis of that, looking at scriptural texts, magisterial texts, things that fathers of the church, doctors of the church, popes, saints had said that no, there's room in our faith for that. Then to go on from that and say, okay, if it is possible, then what are the important questions we have to ask about this? Things such as, what are the possibilities for extraterrestrial life? I start off with what I call the spiritual possibilities. Could some be made in the image of God the way we are? Could some not be fully in the image of God the way we are? That maybe they have a rational intellect and a free will, but the soul that they have is not an immortal spirit the way ours is. So they're made to live a good life in this universe, but not intended for the beatific vision. Is it possible? Then I went into the moral status. Is it possible that some of them are fallen as we are? Is it possible that some are not fallen? If so, then what is their relationship to God? Do they know Him, not know Him? And then on to what we call soteriology, the study of salvation. How, if they are fallen, how might God have a plan of redemption for them? Or even would He have a plan? Would it be like ours? Would it be different? In what ways would is it possible that what's going on the earth in the incarnation of the Son of God, the Word of God as a man, have a ripple effect in other races? Or is it possible that God would just have a separate plan for them? Is it possible that God would actually choose with a particular race? They've already had their chance and it's done, kind of the way it is with angels, the demons who have fallen angels, and those kinds of things. And then looking at stuff like, so what are the possibilities for their final destination, their final destiny, eschatology? And so those are just all the issues that kind of come up given what we already know. Looking at precedents such as what we already know about the angels, as contrary to one person who's criticized me a lot, I do believe that the angels are also made in the image of God, so you can't say we're the only ones. St. Thomas Aquinas certainly believed that, and argues at one point that he thinks they're even more fully in the image of God than we are. So you'd have to argue with Thomas if you're going to say that we're the only ones made in the image of God. And so anyway, I'm talking too much now, but just trying to laying out the issues, the topics, and and what fascinating stuff it leads to.
Yeah. Oh no, it's amazing because well, two things I wanted to say. Well, first, how long did it take you to finally just finish that book? And
I worked on it for 2 years.
Oh, so it was 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
That must have been a long 2 years too.
It wasn't the only thing I was doing, but part of that I was working as a director of adult faith formation at a parish.
Oh, okay.
But also part of that was during COVID, so I have more time than
Yeah. I've been trying to write a book, and I tell you, it takes a lot of time. And I was, after reading yours, I was like, if you got this done in 2 years, that's to me, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. A lot of the research had been done before because of my interest in it. I had a whole bookshelf of things about the historical characters, conversation about it. So I didn't just start with scratch, but
I understand. And that was one of the things, I myself, I've watched many UFO documentaries. I've been researching this for a lot of years, and I was even more so in the New Age stuff when I lived in California before I converted back to Catholicism. And there were some things in your book that I had never really even heard about, which was so great, which I wanted to talk about a couple of them. And just about on a side note, has anyone ever reached out to you for a documentary? I feel like your book is a lot of the things I have not heard on particular documentaries, discussions. Has anybody reached out to you at all?
There are a couple of folks who are probably working on either that kind of project or similar one that have talked to me. So it's probably going to happen. Yeah.
I would say so, because this would be a great resource. I mean, I feel like it's okay. So which brings me into like so I didn't realize some of the early church fathers and their understanding of ETIs you were discussing in the book a lot. Saint Jerome was one of them, of course, which was a really interesting story in there with the satyr. Ask you on that.
Yeah, and there's actually a reference by St. Augustine too, which is interesting, but I didn't know it when I wrote the book. So many things I've discovered since I've sent the book off to the publisher. But
great.
The point of that story, the story was that we have Saint Jerome writing about Saint Paul of the desert, and Saint Anthony going out, making a trip through the desert to go meet him, and on the way he meets what in Greek mythology is called a centaur and then a satyr, those two creatures. And quick encounter with the centaur, but the satyr he actually has a conversation with. And the satyr says to him, so I'm paraphrasing, but he says, "What are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm one of those creatures that the pagans, the Gentiles falsely worship." So first of all, he recognizes he's a creature, which means he has a creator, and that the Greeks worship them falsely. And then, so Jerome kind of is probing, why do you want to talk to me? And he says, basically, we've heard about this Messiah coming to you and to the race of men, and we really want to know more about that.
Wow.
And, the character finally disappeared. But then Anthony, according to St. Jerome, begins to, I think he actually weeps. He's, at least chokes up, I'm sure, and says, "I can't believe it. You've got these Christians in the great city of Alexandria and other places who don't hardly give the time of day to thinking about God. And here's one of these creatures who's not even human, who's seeking information about the Lord who's come." And you could look at that and say, okay, he's just repeating a story or whatever. He doesn't really believe it himself, or he's leaving open. But then he goes on to make a really firm point, and he says, for those of you who don't think such a thing could happen, and he reports how a satyr was captured at one point, seen by lots of folks. When he died, they kept the body in salt. They showed it to the emperor in Constantinople. And this was basically, when I looked at the time period, would have happened about the time Jerome was born. So it's not like centuries before, some kind of legend. He would have known people who would have been alive when that happened. And actually, then I found out later after the book that St. Augustine also talks about like fauns and that kind of Greek mythological characters, saying that he doesn't dispute that they exist. We're just not sure what they are. And so the reason I put that is that it's not specifically extraterrestrial, because at that point, you might say science of the day, mostly Aristotelian, maybe Platonic, was that the Earth was kind of a solid thing where all of the four elements, Earth, all came to the center because of gravity, whatever they would call it, to the Earth. And then there were these other concentric rings of the moon and the sun and the stars. And there was no concept of a rocky ball out there that something could actually live on. Although Plato, Aristotle, and Aquinas allowed for the possibility, there were people who thought that the stars themselves were animated, that they had physical bodies, but they had souls that moved them around. And if you take, that's basically a form of extraterrestrial intelligence. So in that sense, they believed in it. But they didn't think about, at that point, creatures on other planets, because they didn't think those things existed. They recognized planets in the sky, but the title they gave them, planet, means wanderer, because they just thought they were stars that were not going across the sky with the others. They were going on their own paths. But all that to say, obviously, that doesn't prove anything one way or another. But what it did show, and I think is important, and there have been plenty of other Christian writers to say the same thing, highly respected ones. It shows that you could believe that God has created a form of non-human intelligence other than the angels, and still be a very faithful Christian. I mean, who could be better catechized and know the scripture better than St. Jerome, the father of biblical scholarship, the translator of the Vulgate? Who could be better catechized than St. Augustine? And then you have folks later, have quotes from Padre Pio and from Mystic Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich and from other figures, John Paul II even. So the point of all that was part of showing the conversation, is to make it clear that, look, guys, if you think I'm just going off the, off the wheel or something, off the track with even looking at the possibility, these folks that you highly respect from throughout Christian history, they either were convinced that such things existed or that such things could exist. And so I'm standing in the tradition. If you right away deny, you say that it's contrary to Catholic faith, and that some people have said that I'm leading people to hell by even talking about the possibility. If you think I need a tinfoil hat, well, you're going to have to give them to some other folks too, like Padre Pio and Augustine and Jerome and all kinds of others. Yeah.
Well, I definitely don't feel that at all. And I read through a little bit of was it Saint Anthony of the Desert, that book? I was reading through it the other day a little bit, but I was reading two books, so I got a little confused.
So Saint Anthony of the Desert was the one that Saint Jerome was writing about, right, as he went to visit Saint Paul. Yeah.
So what I noticed, because I read that section, and was that it wasn't sensational in the way he was writing, and that's what really, I think today's eyes, everything's so sensational, right? Oh, it's an alien. Oh, it's this and that. But the way he was writing it, I could tell it wasn't reaching for that, sensational thing. Like it would seem so natural.
I mean, that wasn't even the point of the story. He just in the course of telling the story about Anthony going to meet St. Paul of the desert. He just says, "Oh, and by the way, on the way he meets this thing, and if you think they're not real, well, they really are, and here's evidence of it." And then he goes on. So there was nothing sensational about it. It was very matter of fact.
I know it was. That's what I liked, because I wanted to go back to the original reading too, and I found it, I read through it, and that's exactly how I felt. I wasn't even familiar with the Satyr and linked to
they show up in C.S. Lewis, his fiction and stuff too. The Chronicles of Narnia, some of those characters show up. Yeah.
Oh, does it show up in there too?
Well, you've got what is his name? They first meet him. He's Mr. Tumnus. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So he's basically a satyr. He's half man, half Greek, or half goat, or he looks that way anyway. So again, none of this proves that it exists.
No, I understand.
But it simply demonstrates that you can be a faithful Catholic understanding all that those men would have understood, or John Paul II or Padre Pio, and still either believe that they are or believe that they could be, that it's not contrary to the church's teaching and certainly possible within the power of God.
Yeah, and I think it just opens the door for conversation about certain things, and I'm sure you could take anything down a rabbit hole if you wanted to, which could lead to a bad place. But that's certainly, what and I don't think anybody that's reading this book would be doing. I have the quote up from Padre Pio, and I just maybe wanted to read it for the audience because I just thought, oh man, this is, if you've never heard it, because I'm just, again, I'm so shocked that being a UFO guy. Matter of fact, I was even in, I think it was UFON. Is that it? When I was in California, what was it? What is it again? MUFON?
UFON? Yeah.
Yeah. We used to meet over at a church in Los Angeles, and speakers would come in all the time, and so many different types of things. But I never heard this. Padre Pio, when he was asked, of course, I have what he had written. Someone asks him, "Do you, Father? Some claim that there are creatures of gods on other planets too." Of course, you know this, but and his answer is, "What else? Do you think that they don't exist? That God's omnipotence is limited to the small planet Earth? What else? Do you think there are no other beings who loved the Lord?" I mean, he goes on a little more, right? And
I mean, he makes the pretty amazing claim that they're not even fallen. Like we
I think he says it here. The Lord certainly did not limit his glory to the small earth. On other planets, other beings exist who not sin and fall as we did.
That's pretty straightforward.
That's pretty straightforward.
And it sounds like him, doesn't it? I mean, if you ever read anything,
it does.
Very straightforward. What do you mean? Of course there is. And two things I would say about that. One is that given that it's Padre Pio, that's what makes it so intriguing.
Yeah.
Because all the testimonies of this man's life, and his life overlap with mine. He's not some, historical legend sometime.
Right.
All the accounts of his having preternatural gifts.
Mm-hmm.
So that God would reveal to him things like what's happening at a distance, what's going to happen in the future, the state of someone's soul. He was doing that all the time in confessions, that God would reveal to him all kinds of things as just part of the gifts he had given him. So if I had been the interviewer, my next question would have been, Padre, is this just a firm opinion of yours? Because it could have been. Or did God reveal this to you? I mean, that's such a critical question. What if this was some kind of special revelation? But no way to know. But the other thing I want to say about it is that there are people who don't like this idea, who immediately then dismiss that and said, well, the alleged quote. And I'd given, and one person was even saying I didn't have the source. It's right there in the footnote. I don't know how they missed it, but what I did is a little after the book was published, then in order to address that, did some more research, had a friend who's an Italian American, but living in Italy, and an Italian translator, and he helped me track down 2 books that had these quotes, this conversation recorded. One was written by people who know Padre Pio's life, might know that there were certain people that he designated as his spiritual sons and spiritual daughters. They're very close to him, spent a lot of time with him. One of the sources was one of those spiritual sons. The other source was the one known as probably just about his favorite spiritual daughter. And they both said this and in books. And both books were published by the apostolate in San Giovanni Rotondi, right there where he, spent most of his life living. So people who would have known Padre Pio, and almost certainly would have known if either of them were making false claims to be close friends with him, to be a spiritual, son and spiritual daughter. And the man's book was written just a few years after Pio's death. So it seems to me it would be highly unusual if those people would publish it and did not object to that comment, thinking, oh, he's never said anything like that, or even, oh, well, this man's, he's an imposter. If that's the case, then the only reason anybody I think would have for question is because they don't like what he said.
Yeah.
And So I did, if I get to do a second edition of the book, I will include that in the footnote. But I did Spirit Daily, and I had some conversation about the podcast, and they very graciously allowed me to give them that documentation. They published it at one point.
Oh, great. Wow. That's really nice. Yeah, that was really interesting stuff. Well, let me ask you something here. What are your personal thoughts as well on aliens? Do you believe? I mean, obviously, you probably believe in them here, but why?
Why would I mean, to say I believe in them, I mean, it started out as I am convinced that it's a high probability that they do exist somewhere in this vast universe.
Right.
For lots of the reasons that people for 2,000 years have given, including many Christian thought leaders of different kinds, that because of God's creativity, because of the notion of plenitude, that he would fill all the universe with all these different things the same way he fills every little crevice of earth with life, that it would give him more glory, and on and on. And so, those reasons, the interesting thing, it's ironic, as I was finishing the book, I told my editor and the publisher, who are both good friends at Tan Books, that that I really didn't want to touch on the topic of UFOs. It's really a different issue. It's one thing to say I think they can exist and probably do. It's another to say they're here. I think they're here.
Right.
They've been visiting us, and they said the response was, Paul, the people who read this book are not going to be satisfied if you don't at least touch on it and say what you think. So that's why I wrote it as a separate appendix in the back, 6,000 words.
I was noticed that. That's one thing I liked about the book. I was waiting. I'm like, well, where's his opinion here? Okay, yeah, it was the end.
So I think it was clear from the main part of the book that yes, I'm convinced that it is possible. It's not contrary to the church's teaching, and even probable.
Right.
And that there could even be other kinds of things besides ETI, like the kinds of things that Augustine and Jerome wrote about, but what we might call what are sometimes called ultra-terrestrials, that there might actually be other kinds of intelligent life on this planet.
Yeah.
And
Maybe
but not fully made in the image of God as we are. That's because the church does teach we're the ones made in the image of God on earth. Doesn't talk about all the universe. But when I began looking again at the stuff, I've been looking at it for a long time, but in recent times, the evidence has really piled up in so many ways. The accumulation of testimonies and of even scientific evidence by sensory instruments and other kinds of things. And as Cardinal Corrado Balducci, who was very interested in this subject, he died a few years ago, spoke about it several times, and he made a point that I really agree with. And he said, if you're going to approach this, as many people do, that, all you've got is personal testimony, that's not scientific enough or something. He said, then, you've got to throw out most of history. More importantly, the Christian faith is based on, he's not equating this with the gospel, but he's just saying the principle is there, that we have these first-person testimonies of all these witnesses of the resurrection and everything else Jesus did. If you can't accept the credible testimony of a lot of credible witnesses, then where does that leave you? So we can't just rule that out. And the more of that I saw, I began to say, okay, something is going on here. And in that, I addressed several places in the book the notion that it's all demons. That's an absolute statement to say it all is. And I think in part, it usually comes from people who have already been convinced that the church denies their existence. Therefore, it's got to be something else there, and they don't like it. It makes them uncomfortable, so it's got to be demons.
Right.
That seems to be the most of them following. But when you look at the literally hundreds of thousands of cases, not that I've looked at every one, but some of them, I agree, with those critics that some of them sure seem to parallel certain kinds of demonic experiences. Some of the abduction accounts sure seem to be like that. And so I don't deny that. And you have some people claiming, that I haven't really seen it well documented, that some folks, when in an alien encounter, when the being showed up, whatever they were, that they said something like, in the name of Jesus Christ, leave me alone, and they vanished. In that case, I'd say, yeah, it sure sounds like demonic to me. But or even an exorcist, well, they names, but exorcists who would say, yes, I've had to deliver people, exorcise people who got involved with this kind of stuff because they were demons. Yeah, I can accept that.
Oh yeah, sure.
But that's very different from saying there are no aliens and all this stuff is demons or psyops. And you just can't make an absolute statement like that, especially when the great majority of the cases don't seem to have demonic stuff at all. They're nuts and bolts. A lot of them, they seem to be physical craft, which aliens don't need physical craft to get around. They're purely spiritual beings. They're angels that are fallen. So I don't think you can make that kind of claim. A lot of the cases don't seem to have any dark aspect to them at all. Some of the ones that do, again, I'm willing to say that it's probably the case. I mean, if I were the devil and trying to deceive people in every way I could think of, I'd think, well, one way I could do it is these things are out there that God has made, and they're having encounters with them. Why don't I counterfeit that? But to say that because there's some demons that would be counterfeiting that doesn't mean the thing they're counterfeiting is not real. Counterfeits usually are evidence of the reality of the real thing. I may give an example of Padre Pio. There were apparitions, demonic apparitions, that to him and other of the saints, I've written books about this, saints who battle Satan, that they appear as Jesus, or they appear as Mary, one of the saints. Obviously appear as an angel of light. So what does that mean? Does that mean since the demons look like that, obviously there aren't any saints, there's no Jesus, there's no Mary, there's no angel of light? No, it just means that they're counterfeiting those things which really do exist. So, I mean, I hope that seems to be such simple logic to me. Yeah, you don't just say it's all demonic, because some of the cases, they seem to be imitating it.
Now, like I was watching actually a documentary, I don't know if you ever heard this one, about like Aleister Crowley, who conjured up, what many people say, is the Greys, right? I looked up the picture and everything, and there's some people that say, well, that's where the Greys entered through. I don't know if have you ever heard this?
Sure, yeah. I mean,
you have?
Again,
okay.
You're going from one case and trying to say, okay, therefore everything's like that. One of the other things I want to mention is that you had asked about why I wrote the book. And one of the things I found historically was that at least for a couple of centuries, you've had enemies of the Christian faith who did believe that extraterrestrial intelligence exists, and claimed very vehemently that ETI then disproves the Christian faith, so Catholic and otherwise Christian. So famous people like Thomas Paine, who wrote The Age of Reason and was the pamphleteer in England who helped encourage the American Revolution. And he wrote extensively against the Christian faith. And one of the things he wrote was, there were a lot of people at his time who were convinced, of course, it's real. And out there, not that they've necessarily visited, but it's real. And it disproves your faith. You have other people like Swedenborg and some others who are religious people, but claim to have encounters with beings out there who would say, we're going to reveal to you the true religion, because all the religions on earth are fake. And you're still getting some of that in some of these so-called encounters. And so what you've had is people who hate the Catholic faith many times saying this is going to disprove your faith.
Yeah.
And I thought, if we have a disclosure of this by the government or scientists or otherwise, we're going to hear that again. In fact, all you have to do is watch the comm boxes on some of the, whether it's X or other places where this subject comes up, and they'll say, when we see these things, religion is done, that's over. And so you've got that strand still out there that are claiming that, all the world religions are going to be in shock and collapse if we should discover, have public affirmation, if you want to, confirmation that these things are real. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. I mean, in that sense, it's a Christian apologetics book that, no, it's not, it doesn't destroy our faith. Our faith can accommodate that. We have a lot of questions to, ask and answer, but don't do that, because, so recently someone, won't identify individuals, but had said in an article that I was also quoted on this subject that that it's contrary to the Christian faith, and if we ever discovered them, it would disprove Christianity.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my goodness, what a terrible thing to say, because you really don't know if it could be disclosed. And if it is, you've just told all these Catholics that, yeah, they don't have to believe anymore because these things disprove it. It's not the case at all.
No, not the case. I mean, we were talking before the camera rolled. It's funny because you have such casual conversation right before like recording everything, and I was saying it's like the alien thing wouldn't be a threat to me. I mean, as I said to you, it's like we already have tons of atheists and people that are already against the faith. How is this going to really change that much? I mean, here we go. Okay, another person that doesn't believe in God. Okay, get in line.
I mean, when when the Catholic missionaries and stuff went to the so-called New World, the Americas, and first encountered it, they weren't believing in Christ, although they had some interesting seeds of the word, as one of the ancient Christian writers called it. But that didn't disprove our faith. Oh no, these men are out there and they don't believe in God. They don't know anything about Jesus. It must not be true. No, you start talking to them about it. But so it wouldn't disprove, and I think it's a dangerous idea to say that it would disprove. When I hear that, I want to say to somebody, please read my book and then think about it some more.
Yeah,
but it's really
definitely read your book. I mean, it's
the other thing is that it's, how do I say it? Because there are so many other narratives out there in the UFO community, it's often called that, where people, it's an interesting thing. What I find is when a lot of people who become secular, maybe they grow up with faith and they rejected Christian faith for one reason or another. As one person recently said to me, it's the people that I met that made me leave Christianity. They're still, St. Augustine said, our hearts are restless till they rest in you, Lord. And they still have this longing for the transcendent. And they still have longing for this thing that's above, something beyond the prosaic, the everyday life that we have, because they're made for something more. And so you find a lot of the folks that have left the faith because of this, or left the faith, that they end up getting into this because it seems like something beyond the prosaic. And they look at that, they'll start looking at paranormal phenomena, they'll get into consciousness studies, as it's called, and then start all these debates about what if there's this great cosmic consciousness that from which the material world arises, and what if there actually is life after death and stuff. And sometimes I'll have a conversation. I'll say, okay, sounds like you're pulling on Eastern religious roots. Okay.
Yep.
Sounds a little bit like Buddhism, Hinduism, some other things.
Yep. That wasn't
why is it the West, the Western roots, the Christianity you don't even touch at all? Because they're very clear. It's kind of like a very clear vision in the Christian faith of how the universe came to be and how it's kept in existence, and how things could happen that we seem paranormal, but it's because God gives gifts, and how, of course, there's life after death because of what happened to you 1,000 years ago. And
right.
But their attitude is, I don't want anything to do with that. It's like they're post-Christian. They feel like they've already encountered Christianity, found it wanting, and rejected it, so they can't. That's the last place they're going to look. And I'm encouraging them. Let's I'll help you see a Catholic, a Christian view of the cosmos, and this is an alternative to what it is you're accepting. And so I'm not going to push it on you, but I'd encourage you, think about this.
Yeah.
Think about it. How might it be if there is a personal God? He's not an impersonal force like in Star Wars. A personal God who created the universe out of nothing, who sustains the universe at every moment, who loves the creation he's made, who's made some in his image, and they've fallen. Oh, and that he's not part of the creation, and the creation is not part of him, but he's actually separate, transcendent. And who, in order to heal us of our brokenness, actually came to earth himself, became one of us, and on, and wants us to live with him and have and enjoy eternal joy. How might that explain all the things you're looking at in a different way? So please at least give it some consideration.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I'm meeting up with people who hear that and say, I think I need to look at the Christian account again.
Well, I agree. And as I said, I've definitely come from a lot of New Age stuff. I was in that for many, many years, probably more years than my Catholic faith, in all honesty, at least in deep studies and some, during my 30s and things. Eh, Absolutely. And what I really realize is, okay, look at Buddha and Lao Tzu are very wise men, and I occasionally read some of that and get, particular influence, but they're men that are dead in the ground, where Christ has risen. And it's, this is not a self-help book where I think in my new age, I was looking at these great sages to fix everything. But that only goes so far. And I think what they don't realize is the miraculous things, where I think a lot of Christians even are struggling today with. Let's just get into the Eucharist, the miracle side of what Christ brings us, right? He is not dead in the ground. He's risen. This is complete to me. This was the next level that I needed to go to outside of, okay, great philosophers, Stoics, all these things. You learn good things from them, but Christ really brings the complete.
St. Augustine had a similar experience. His long conversion took him a
Yeah,
while. And right now,
that's why I love him so much.
that I'm doing a podcast commentary series for 10 books on St. Augustine's Confession, 20 episodes. I'm just loving it. Love him so much. He helped me come to the Catholic faith many years ago when I first read him in grad school. But one of the things that just recently was commenting on how he gets to a point where he's been reading the Neoplatonic philosophers and others, and he finds all this great truth, and they're pointing him away from the sins of the flesh and from being so attached to everything earthly, and to start looking above and something greater. And he loves it. And it's so wonderful. But then he says, but there was something missing, and the missing was the Word made flesh.
Yeah.
And that's what he had to have in order to become complete. He's very grateful, and even to people like Cicero, he's very grateful to them. But that was the completion. And I found the same thing. So I'm not
Me too.
Yeah, I'm not pressing my faith on people. I'm just inviting them, take a look at this concern. Don't rule out the Christian tradition right away just because you had a bad experience or because you think the West has tried it and found it wanting. For a lot of folks, when I start talking about what I see as a Catholic vision of the cosmos, they'll say, boy, that wasn't my idea at all. All I ever heard was rules or something like that. Say, right. Well, yeah, there must be rules, but there's more. And it's kind of funny. How many times do you hear someone say, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual.
Yes.
And
I've said it.
My reply is often, do it gently and kindly.
Yeah.
What that sounds like to me is that you want all the consolations of religion without the commitments. And that's what sets kind of religion, which actually means, based on the word, probably it means to bind. That's what sets it apart, that you can be spiritual and try to have the consolations of something greater than you that loves you or whatever. But religion not only reveals that clearly, but says, and therefore you have commitments, moral choices you have to make, things you have to do.
Aquinas has said that the incarnation was not necessary for human life.
He said that God is God. He could choose. He could find another way to do it.
Right.
He thought it was most fitting for the race of Adam, for us. But that God certainly could have found another way and done it another way. And that's an important insight. There are so many things in Aquinas that are important in the conversation in the book. Again, he didn't believe in extraterrestrial intelligence because he didn't think there were planets out there that could have beings living on them. He was too Aristotelian for that. He followed Aristotle's cosmology, which did not allow for such a thing. So it was a matter of limitation of science. If Aristotle had been able to say, yeah, there are planets out there just like ours with the same conditions, that I'm sure he would have, tried to address that question. Thomas would have. But even then, as I mentioned before, he had this notion, this basically ETI, that, it's possible that the stars are actually animated creatures, sentient living creatures, and their souls are moving the bodies of the star around. So even that he does. But besides that, he has a couple of insights that are so important. And this is one of them, that the incarnation and all that goes with it, death, resurrection, is not the only way for God to save a race.
So that could be like, not to interrupt you, but I just want to really understand this and clarify this for myself. So this could just be specific for our race, or the human race, right? And there
Yeah,
could be
that
things that are
I mean, he
important.
even says that God could have done it for us a different way, even. But,
Right.
and this is the important point, once given his decision that he would do it this way for us, then it became necessary in the sense that his plan has to be carried out. That's why Jesus would say, for instance, it's necessary that the Son of Man suffer and die, that kind of thing. People read that and say, see, it was the only way that we could have been saved. But Aquinas would say, no, he's just saying that, God is God. He could have found another way. But given that he chose this way for us, then it was necessary in history for it to be carried out this way. Jesus had to go to the cross. So that's an important insight from him. And then the other is when you start talking about, well, is there a possibility that of an incarnation of God, the Son of God, one of the other Trinity, members of the Trinity, persons of the Trinity, in another race to save them or for other purposes? And Augustine's principle is he's really clear about it. He, again, not thinking about other planets, but the principle is, yeah, he's God. He can do that. There's nothing contrary to his nature, and nothing inherently self-contradictory about his assuming a second created nature. That's how he calls it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty important to see that Aquinas thought, if Aquinas knew that there was a possibility that there were other planets out there that could have life, and applied that principle, it would have been, sure, there could be an incarnation there.
Right.
And he's not the only one to say that.
Yeah. Sounds like it. And I mean, that's why your book led me to this too, to really, okay, I love books. I love and hate books like this, that I have to I'm never going to get through this book. Like I want to get through the book. And I'm like, oh, but I gotta put the book down, and I have to study what he's saying here.
Yeah.
And then I gotta come back. No, I love the book. It just takes me longer to get through it because I'm always like, I didn't know this. I don't understand this concept. And I had to really read through what Aquinas was saying there. And thank you for your great explanation on this. It was very helpful for me, and I'm sure many other people on what Aquinas was saying here. Because I think I just said it's not a simple yes or no.
Yeah, and the book is full of what ifs.
Yep.
And then, is this contrary to Catholic faith in any way? And if not, then I think it's possible. Don't say this is the way it happened. Of course, we don't know. There's just so many people who are shutting down the possibilities. Even another book, I won't mention the author that you and I talked about before,
right,
who maybe close to 20 years ago was writing a book that was somewhat open to this, but would have ruled out things that I don't think you need to rule out. And I had I'll just say a professor from a Ivy League school very kindly had read the book and reached out to me and said, thank you. And I read the other book, and I think yours is much more optimistic. And so, I've had some really good encouragement from that. I've had people who are faithful Catholics who've had experiences that, observing, being given information that, and they said, this can't be human.
Yeah.
It's not demonic. What do I do? Yeah. And that it was concerning because they said, how do I fit it with my faith? And then, one of them called me and said, I just want you to know, I read the book, and point by point, you showed how sure this could be compatible with my faith. And that it brought me great peace. And I thought, okay, if I only wrote the book for that one person, that was worth it.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually. I was going to ask you that. Have you had any kind of experience, or have you ever seen anything UFO wise, UAP, as anything in your own personal life ever?
Yeah, when I was a senior in high school, I'm from Savannah, Georgia, and there's an island there with a beach, Tybee Island. And I was out with a couple of friends one night walking the beach and saw something that I would call UFO because it was, for me, unidentified. And for all I know, it could be explained by some scientist or somebody else who knows. So it's not like I'm going to say it was kind of nuts and bolts craft landing or anything. But it was two circular figures without a clear edge. I guess some people who've seen similar kind of things would call it looks almost like plasma, but it's shining in the night. Had red and green colors in it. So we were pretty scared of it. Got back in the car, drove away and it seemed to follow us. Maybe that was an optical illusion to my home and disappeared. So I don't, it's
Yeah.
unidentified in the sense that I don't know what to make of it.
Well,
Maybe there's somebody out there who could say, "Oh yeah, that was actually a so and so. It's a prosaic phenomenon." And that's okay. I'm fine with that.
well, I think even for, like you were saying, for people that may have even had some kind of experience or be unclear, this book really does give a sense of comfort. I had stepped away from the alien thing, UFO thing, because I felt like I was, for a time just getting too into it. And I didn't even want to touch the topic for a few years. I just really just felt like, no, 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 I don't want anything to do with this. And actually, only about a year ago, I was in Utah where I was living, and I saw something in the sky. It was really, really, I don't know what it was. I guess we'd call this a UAP, and it was in the middle of there was no clouds around, which is very important to the story, and there's nowhere this thing could go, right? I mean, within a amount of time. But it was very weird because it was rectangular. It kind of looked like a refrigerator. It's weird. I called my brother. I said it looked like a refrigerator in the sky. I'm like, which is, what is this? And I had to do a U-turn. It was about 20 seconds, if that, to go back and look at this thing. And because I was looking at it, watching it, and 10 seconds, 15, 20 seconds later, it's completely gone, nowhere to be seen at all. And there's just nowhere for this thing to go. And that really kind of, I don't think it scared me. And I saw something else in that same evening. Utah, of course, is a hotbed for many things, anyways. But it did get me thinking again in this particular area, whatever that was, whatever it may have been. I have no idea. No idea. I mean, we have many stories, though, of many people that have seen and had experiences. So, and I think your book just really, again, it gave me a sense of comfort to know that, okay, look, God could have other plans for other creatures. All right, leave it at that.
And they could be here. I mean, that's the thing.
And
Just,
they
a
could be
lot of
here too.
scientists will say absolutely
Yeah.
can't go faster than light, all that kind of things. But if you start looking at quantum theory and all the kind of cutting edge physics, besides the fact, I mean, this is where history always helps us. How many times in history have scientists said, "Oh, that's impossible," and
Right.
then somebody comes along and figures out how to do it? Who was it? Thomas Kuhn, writing about the nature of, what is it, scientific revolutions or something, where you have a whole paradigm shift where people thought absolutely it's like this, like Copernicus, it's got to be this, and then along comes somebody and says, no, actually it's like this. So that's one of the things I'll say in the book. I'm not going to argue the science of it, because science has a history of being wrong on things. That's okay. Science has done wonderful things for us, but when there's a dominant narrative and people come along and challenge it, often the scientific community can be dogmatic about the narrative until finally it's demonstrated that the narrative doesn't work. That's happening in physics right now. The possibility of, the fabric of time and space warping and being able to make a leap across, that kind of thing. I don't know if that's happening or not, but just seems to me, I don't want to say anything like that is impossible. It's just,
I mean, hey, this year was a big year. I mean, you had Congress, right? Releasing UFO data, and I watched a lot of that hearing and things like that. Maybe we're getting closer to some things here. To be able to at least to be able to study, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard, there's a new foundation called the Soul Foundation, SOL as in the sun. And you may have heard of Gary Nolan, the Stanford scientist who's been studying this stuff for a whole bunch of reasons, but he's kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of things, looking at material and material science, looking at even at the atomic structure and stuff of things that are claimed to have been left behind or by crash vehicles. But anyway, brilliant guy, just amazing. And he's one of the folks who has founded a new organization called the Soul Foundation.
Yeah.
And their purpose is to get together scholars from all kinds of fields, scientists, yes, but also from the humanities, also government policy advisors, journalists, people even formerly from the intelligence community, folks of all kinds of backgrounds, but who want to take this seriously and study it seriously.
Mm.
And so they, in their statement of purpose, their mission, they talk about how if these things should become publicly confirmed, that there could be a big kind of shock in the world. I don't think it'll be as big as some think, and I don't think they do. They think it's not going to be that big either. But that people need to be prepared for it, and how would they accommodate this within their worldview, and that religion would have to be an important part of that. The theologians need to be at the table for that. So to their credit, they had their first annual symposium in November, and to their credit, they had some people talking about religion as it relates to this, and they invited me to speak about my book and about here's a Catholic view of it, and all kinds of folks. You would recognize the names, both of the speakers, about maybe a dozen speakers, and then I think it was maybe only 300 people invited. It was invitation only, and had a great chance to not just to hear their talks, but to talk to them over coffee, over wine, in between sessions, over lunch and dinner. Pardon me. They were wonderful folks, and they were very even-headed. I don't know how to say it. Very intelligent, and not dogmatic. Most of them, at least the ones that I met about things, they just said, "We just want to know what it is. We want to get to the truth of it." And the fact that they would include, religion in that, and a Catholic view, I thought this is wonderful. So I was thrilled by that. I don't know if I'll get to do anything else with them or not. If not, I'm just glad to have had one chance to kind of present to the gathering there. Here's a Catholic view of the cosmos, and if these things should be disclosed, I believe this is how the Catholic faith could accommodate it without betraying its tradition, while being faithful to its tradition. And here are the kinds of questions that we would ask, and how we might contribute to the public conversation. So it's to me, and there are other groups too. They're wanting to study it from a scientific point of view, folks who are looking at public policy. So there's some good advances made. And of course, there are going to be people there with all kinds of ideas.
Yeah, sure.
That's
great.
It was great.
I'd love to be involved in that. That sounds like very interesting.
I was really impressed with the folks from the moment I got there. Very amiable, very friendly, very interested in your story or whatever you're there to contribute and talk about. Anyway, I felt right at home with the folks. And
this is just a personal opinion, but I think that there's going to be a lot more books in the future that are similar to yours. I think this is going to be a topic that we're going to deal with a lot more in the future. And that's why I think your book is just so special. Maybe it's a little ahead of its time, possibly. We'll see.
Yeah, sometimes I think that was some of the pushback I get.
But
again, if tomorrow there actually were some kind of public confirmation, the president comes out and says, "Okay, guys, we've been hiding this for a long time, but yeah, they're out there, they're here, they're real. We don't understand fully, but you just need to know that." Then I'm hoping that if that would happen, then people would say, especially Catholics, but other Christians too could benefit from the book. Now, what do I do? How does my faith accommodate it? Like the person I was talking about who called me, I'm hoping that they'll pick up the book and read it and say, "Oh, okay, it's all right."
I agree with you. Do you have time for one more question? Or
sure. Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you just one more thing. I was reading Book of Enoch here not too long ago, and
I know it's coming.
And the Watchers, who are angels, right? Of course, this part gets confusing for me with how an angel is even how an angel can procreate, because I thought it was a different species. Maybe you can even help me on that. And of course, mate with the females, which we get the Nephilim race. And I know this is not anything. This is more UFO. A lot of UFO specialists have talked about this. I mean, did I miss some of the stuff in the book, or did you touch on this topic a little bit? Is there particular theologians or people that have said, okay, this is an alien race. The Nephilim was an alien race.
I didn't touch on that.
I didn't think so, but I was like,
well, it's so funny that
I missed this.
if you go on the ancient, if you ever look at any of those ancient aliens,
Yes. They get into this.
They're all convinced that they go to the Bible, it's all aliens.
Yes.
And I've heard someone that I respect otherwise they just say, I was looking at Genesis and it's all aliens.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is one reason why I'm in the conversation now. I want to be able to say. So, for instance, there's in the history of biblical interpretation, after the Darwinian theory became popular, and how do I put this in a short way? Anyway, there would be Christians who would say, okay, if there's anything in the record that's anomalous, God just came in and worked a miracle. And not considering the possibility that God could have just somehow worked through natural processes that we didn't understand. Admitting that, yeah, God's behind it all. But to just kind of jump in and say, oh, yeah, that was a miracle God did. Instead of saying, well, let's look and see how it might have happened. And then, in the natural realm. And that came to be known as the God of the gaps approach. If there's a gap and you're kind of understanding how it happened, is, oh, well, God did that. God did that. Right. And so, okay, I understand their concern. And there's certainly a lot of things like special creation of human beings that is that truth, that kind of truth. But I'm finding that people have what I call the alien in the gaps approach, where if there's something they don't understand, it's got to be aliens. It's got to be aliens. Can't be God. It's got to be aliens.
Right.
Or anything else. And I said, when someone asked me, a journalist was asking me about this, that okay, so when you see Genesis 6 and think about Nephilim and stuff, or the one they always go to is Ezekiel and the wheel and the vision of the wheels and the wheels.
Right. Yeah. That
sure sounds like a UFO to me,
Right, sure.
What I will say is that, okay, you're part of a community that normally has been concerned that when people have some kind of encounter, that folks who don't think UFOs are possible or just have never thought about it and they dismiss it as tinfoil hat stuff, that often then the reaction will be, oh, that wouldn't be a spaceship or a UFO. That was fill in the blank, Venus, swamp gas stuff. And basically what they're doing, it's a form of presumption, is to say, all right, you believe you saw this thing, but the thing you believe it is, I don't believe in. So I'm going to reinterpret it and say it's got to be something I believe in to be true.
Right.
And in the UFO community, almost everybody agrees. You don't do that to somebody. Maybe they were deceived about what it was, but don't just right away say, well, there can't be any UFOs, so it's got to be Venus or something else that's pretty absurd. So I say, let's take biblical text the same way. You're calling it which basically the text says it's an angel.
Yeah,
and
it does.
It's a revelation of God and all these things, and in Ezekiel especially. And basically you're taking the attitude, well, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in UFOs, so it's aliens. You're reinterpreting it to fit what you believe and don't believe, and that's not respecting the person who reports. It's not respecting the thing. For Ezekiel, it wasn't unidentified. He knew what it was. He tells us what it is.
Right.
And the whole Jewish and Christian community ever since has told us what it is. So I think that's a presumptuous approach to that particular thing.
That makes sense.
The whole thing with Genesis 6, gets complicated. So you have that passage that talks about the sons of God coming down to the daughters of men, taking them as wives, and then having offspring. And then the same passage says, and there were giants in the earth that day. Nephilim, it's the plural of Nephil, and so people have debated that from early times, starting with the Jewish interpretation, even before Christian, apart from Christian interpretation. And you have several different interpretations. One would be, okay, because sometimes in Scripture, sons of God refers to angels. It's got to be angels. They're having intercourse with women, human women, and they're having this kind of weird demonic hybrid as children who are giants and those of the Nephilim. Okay, that's one view.
Right.
You have other view that says, no, actually, sons of God also gets used in Scripture to talk about mighty rulers. And so a king will be called the son of God, or they'll even be spoken of in the plural of rulers or mighty men, strong men,
Yeah.
Even judges sometimes. And therefore, that's really what they're talking about. And then why are they being condemned for marrying these women that it looks like either they're marrying out of their class, or and they were not supposed to be marrying peasant women or whatever, or it's a polygamy thing where the rest of the book of Genesis holds up one man, one woman as the ideal and the right thing. And then even though it shows Abraham and others being polygamous, it shows all the trouble that comes from that. And so the sense is that basically when it says they took whichever wives they wanted, another way to interpret that from the Hebrew is translated is they took all that they wanted. Okay. So that's what was going on, and they're talking about that. A third then, so St. Augustine would say that sons of God here refers to the line of Seth, which was the good line,
right?
Adam's, after Cain killed Abel, and that those descendants of Cain were the other ones who were bad guys,
right?
And so that you have the descendants of the line of Seth intermarrying with daughters of men who were of the line of Cain, and that was bad because of it was a wicked people basically, and so that's part of what happened. So that's like a third one, and Augustine goes into that pretty extensively. They all have different little parts of the interpretation that point one way or another. But for sure, number one, it's definitely not universal in the early church that they were demons. The other thing is that in the early church, you did have some folks thinking that angels might have a body made of what they call subtle matter that was something more like air or wind that could move easily and you couldn't actually see. And so maybe that's the angels have bodies like that. But the church's consensus, came to be pretty quickly, no, angels are non-corporeal. They don't have bodies. And we're kind of halfway between them and God in the sense that they're all spirit, like God is all spirit, but we have bodies.
Right.
And so if that's the case, and I think that really has become the consensus, right, then you're not going to have, and Augustine talks about this, you're not going to have fallen angels having intercourse with women and having children from that. Thomas Aquinas talks about that. Yeah, you can't have that. At most, I don't want to go into too many details if you're going to be putting this online. Aquinas had a theory about, since there are a lot of people who claimed, like women would claim, that a demon came to them in the night, had intercourse with them, and then they got pregnant. He had a theory about how that happened, and it did not involve some kind of, what the demon was doing actually involved something from another human being. So anyway, so that the child was human. It was not actually a hybrid of demons and humans. And that's just seems to have been pretty much the consensus of the church that can even happen. So let's rule out the fallen angel thing. There are other reasons to do it in the text, and entire long articles and essays have been written about this by scholars. But I think the folks who still think that it could have been demons having intercourse with women and having children from that, they're just kind of ignorant of the Christian tradition about that, at least the Catholic tradition, that no, demons can't do that. They can appear to do it, but they couldn't have children that were half demon and half human. The other thing is in the text is that if you look at it, Augustine points this out, you look at it, it says, and there were Nephilim, the mighty men, can also be translated that way, the great warriors. Mm-hmm. In the earth in those days, can be translated giants. And the earth in those days, also, not just after the sons of God came down, but they were already there when the sons of God came down. If you look at the passage carefully, I think he's right. It's making the case that the giants in the land were there before the sons of God came, whoever they were, and did that, and after. Right. It's both. So it's not the result of that. It's something else.
Yeah, I know.
But never you're going to find, I don't think, any serious Bible commentator is going to say it's aliens. That's something that's been written in, read into it by a kind of UFO mindset. And this
absolutely.
I want to be part of this conversation. I want to help people see, no, you're importing stuff into the text. And and you don't want to do that. Just like you don't want to talk to experiencers, as they're called, and immediately say, well, what you're saying can't be the right thing. So what I believe is what happened. This is what happened. You're not respecting the source and at least being seriously considerate of what they're saying.
Yeah, okay. That I like the way you said that. Thank you. I'm gonna take some of that apologetics myself and use that in dialogue with some of my friends. So it's very helpful. I know. I mean, I've had the conversation too, even about Fatima. I mean, a lot of the more of my new age UFO friends, of course, will say, "Well, that Fatima event was a UFO event." I mean, I'm sure you've heard this.
Yeah, and I'll say the same thing to that. Okay,
Yep.
you think it's UFO, but the people who experienced it, I mean, you may have had some pagans out in the crowd, or so. A lot of people were there who were not Catholics, were not Christians, and you had some conversions. Actually, you may have read that, including one particular journalist because of what they saw. But the girls, I mean, the children who first saw them, and then the other things that the people out there, they knew exactly what was unidentified for them. It was the Blessed Virgin Mary, and then a miracle of the sun doing all that. So I'm sorry that you have people out there in the UFO community trying to read everything through the lens of UFOs, including Christian experience, Christian history, biblical stuff. And I have to gently remind them, no, I don't think you're being respectful of the tradition and of the person reporting what they saw, or the people reporting what they saw. They're convinced they knew exactly what it was.
Right.
So just because it doesn't fit in your categories doesn't mean it's a UFO.
Well, like you say, I think they can be a lot of people can be very dismissive just of biblical stuff in general. They already, here comes this Christian on board. I know where they're going. And yeah, it's definitely been a battle just for, I think some people like this to even communicate with us.
And again, that's one of the things I appreciate about the people I met at this whole symposium. They weren't like that at all. I was welcomed, very warmly received in the talk I gave, comments that I had afterward. I've had people follow up with me by email that want to talk about it further. Some folks saying this has caused them to revisit some things, and it's great. But I know there are other folks who are out there like you're talking about that just
well, and I think that's a lot of where the culture is today, the zeitgeist of the time. Like, conspiracy theory, this word has been weaponized, right? I mean, it's a word that just wants to crush an argument. I mean,
and there's so many for. So you've got all this apocalyptic fervor. I've written about that. I wrote a book 20-something years ago called The Rapture Trap. Excuse me, a Catholic response to end times fever. And one of the chapters in there was looking at the history with the Catholic Church of apocalyptic movements and stuff, and how they always end up in misery. Just never ends well. And because you have so much of that today, well, you're getting this revival of that. And some of the folks who are in the UFO conversation, if you want to call it that, they go well beyond just saying the church doesn't, denies the existence of such things. They're actually weaving a new mythology, apocalyptic mythology, saying, oh, and this is all false flag, inspired by demons, because the nations of the world are going to use this to scare everybody into saying we need a one world government. And then that sets up for Antichrist, and on and on. This is the great deception spoken of in the gospel, and on and on. That's pure mythology. I mean, that's just pure fabrication. And then they add the Nephilim to it and all that stuff, and people saying, so this is bloodline that's been coming down ever since. I said, guys, write some science fiction if it makes you feel
well, people
that's not biblical study. That's not Catholic faith. That's not biblical study. It has nothing to do with that.
I made the mistake one time in my class when we were studying this topic. I said, or it could be aliens, and oh boy. Yeah, everybody wanted to know what I meant on that. It's like, oh, geez. It's an infatuation we have too, though, with this with this UFO.
Well, and I'm saying, and with the end times too, and so you have a lot of especially more traditional Catholics, and that's the funny thing, is the ironic thing. I'm always telling people I'm a traditional Catholic. I mean, I am. If it's the teaching of the church, man, I'm with it.
Right.
And I've even said, in the book and publicly, if tomorrow the church came out and said authoritatively, no, there are no such things as aliens, I'd submit to it. Yeah. I get the feeling that some of the people who are most vociferous in their attack on, my teaching, I won't say on me, but who say it's, you're leading people to hell, that you're setting the Christians up for the Antichrist. You're doing a disservice to the church. I have a feeling that if the Vatican, the Pope, whatever, came out with a comment tomorrow, even just saying something as innocuous as the church has no official position on this, they wouldn't go. They would still deny. They would still oppose that, and they would not submit to the decision of the church. Sure, and certainly, I'm convinced most of them would not if the church actually came out and said, "Yeah, they're real," or even more specifically, "Yes, we're not at this point. We're not neutral about it anymore. It is possible. It's not contrary to faith."
Yeah, well, it seems like the Vatican's been pretty open to this topic anyways. I couldn't see them not going in really this direction. But I like the point that you made, though, that what you're obedient to, just as myself,
And
Right.
I've had some fun with the conversation at the talk I gave at the Soul Symposium the night before. I was saying I want to add a little more humor to this, and these conversations, even though it's really intensely interesting stuff, it can get a little dry. And one of the things I thought of was that so many times either I or someone talking about these things, these Christian or specifically Catholic, will be asked the question, "Would you baptize an alien?" So I think someone's even asked the Pope that before, and others.
Yeah. I've seen this.
So my response was, "Would I baptize an alien?" So okay, like most hypothetical questions, the answer is largely determined by the specifics of the hypothesis. So, what case are we talking about? Would you baptize aliens? So I said, think about the movie Signs. How many people have seen the movie Signs? You remember about crop circles and
Oh, I love that.
So I said, what if we were living a real life version of that movie, and the aliens are hostile, and the aliens are invading, and they die upon contact with water. And then I said, if that were the case, I'd say, yes, baptize them all as soon as possible. That's how you get stop the alien invasion. So anyway, that's kind of fun. But
that is fun. I think, in all honesty, my master's degree is like in a theology apologetics, and I think this is actually an apologetics conversation. I mean, I think this is really what this is. How are you going to communicate with, whether it's aliens or just the people that are here on Earth that have inkling to go in that direction? I think you've said it well enough in this video, how you try to maybe talk softly or listen to people that have different ideas. I mean, ultimately, though, we're trying to lead them to the faith. And the best way to do it is okay. Well, let's get in here and have a conversation. I mean, it sounds like the Soul Foundation, for one, is really a great organization for things like that. But yeah, this is why I think your book is just, it's very necessary in a lot of ways. Now, it's just a fun read. Okay, all right.
Guys, if you like the topic, it is a fun read. It is
some fun too.
To hear some of them,
out loud. I mean, the Catholic Church is fun, okay? I love being Catholic. Gosh, we can have a good time here too and talk about other topics that are interesting.
Yeah, the richness of the faith, the nuance, the complexity. One of the things I said in the talk there too was, so I asked the question, how should Catholics be approaching this whole thing?
Yeah, and
one of the things I said is that we really need a sense of humility. We need to rediscover the God of Job. I talk about that in my book, that God there makes it very clear that Job doesn't have a clue about all the greatness of the things he's done in the cosmos. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the world, when I scattered the stars and the Orion and the Pleiades out there? And Job says, yes, sir. He goes,
yeah.
And we need to have that attitude, number one. Number two, that we need to stretch our imagination some. That the universe that God has given us is proving to be much more complex and complicated, amazing, remarkable, mysterious, and beautiful in all those ways. And sometimes we just have the failure of imagination to think about what could be and still be in keeping with who God is. Another thing we have to do is, and I encourage Catholics and other Christians to do this, before you just dismiss it all and say it's all aliens or whatever, government psyops. start getting into the literature, and not the people that are making crazy claims, but people like, some of the journalists like Ross Coulthard who just map it out, like very careful journalism and historical reporting. And you begin to see, oh my gosh, the evidence that we're encountering something, and it's not demonic, is huge out there. So you got to take that into consideration. And then finally, I said, and I want to say to the scientists of the audience that we appreciate all that science has taught us as Christians and about our universe and our world. We've learned a lot from you, and maybe we can return the favor now. In that, some of the views of some scientists, the materialist view that everything's matter and energy and forces or whatever, that's been tried and found wanting, especially in the UFO community. They're bumping up against things that don't fit the scientific paradigms, whether it's, travel beyond the speed of light or whatever. And they are beginning to realize, okay, maybe there are things that can't be put in a test tube, or, like that.
Right.
And that I hope the Christians might be able to contribute something to them, in this regard, to look at the kinds of things that we've said all along. And of course, by that, I mean the whole thing about whether there's a consciousness that from which the universe has come, or whether there's life after death, or all these questions that some people are asking. I want to say, well, yeah, let's talk about who God is. Yeah, let's talk about the resurrection. Let's talk about those things. So anyway, it's
I agree. I agree.
It's a great conversation to be had if folks will kind of open their minds a little and not be so defensive, and not making a statement that it's all this. If you hear it's all, whatever comes after that, it's probably going to be wrong.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, this has been a great conversation. I mean, I really appreciate you being here. I hope we can keep in touch, and I just want to see what you're doing. Please, that would be great. Such a great topic. Maybe we can end in prayer.
Yes, let's do it.
You know what? I think what I'll do is, because we talked a lot about Padre Pio, I have one of his prayers over here on my desktop. I don't have this one memorized, but I think I'm going to pray it. We did talk about him a lot. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen.
Pray to the Lord with me, because the whole world needs prayer. And every day, when your heart especially feels the loneliness of life, pray to the Lord, because even God needs our prayers. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jonathan. What a delight it's been. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really, really, really appreciate it here.
On voit bien, ouais, j'ai vu, elle est pas derrière là. Regarde, elle est pas derrière là.